I'm going to get on introducing Barbara. Barbara founded and is president of Atticus Consulting, and she's out of Cincinnati. She's an executive coach and best-selling author of a multi-author book, Leadership Fusion. She's held senior leadership roles in organizational development and human resources, and she served on the faculties of the Farmer School of Business at Miami University and also at the University of Cincinnati. She consults across multiple industries and regions of the world to provide executive coaching, team development, and training solutions. Most recently, she served as executive coach for the Cincinnati Chamber's We Lead program for women leaders. We're excited that she'll lead us through some great conversations today and thoughts and solutions and ideas on managing difficult conversations. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Barbara and welcome everybody. And for those of you who joined late, make sure you put in the chat who you are, just to introduce yourself to your peers and others.
Great. Thank you very much, Laura. Hope everybody can see my screen. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all virtually today to talk about a really important topic. Today, more than ever, the ability to manage those difficult conversations in the workplace, that can be a game changer. How do you prepare for these discussions? And what's that secret for that individual who always seems to be able to communicate effectively, especially or even when times are tense? So during today's session, I'm going to be introducing you to the Thomas Kilmann instrument, and that can help you to identify your own preference for dealing with conflict. And there are no right or wrong styles, but I'll share specific scenarios where certain styles are more effective. And also I'm going to introduce some strategies for you to leverage your expertise when dealing with somebody who may have a different perspective than you when dealing with conflict. We just finished up Thanksgiving and are moving into the holiday season. Tight deadlines loom. There's a never-ending to-do list and family gatherings. So I'm happy to say what we'll be covering here today can be applied outside work as well. So let's start out with a poll, and we'll see where everybody is at with respect to these challenging scenarios. So when faced with a looming confrontation, my attitude generally is, bring it on. What can I do to get out of this? How can I make this work for both of us? Or I never have confrontation. So Laura put up the poll. Please go ahead and respond.
Give it another 2 seconds. Looks like I've got most everybody. There you go. You seeing the results?
Okay, great. And so it looks like how can I make this work for both of us is by far the most common response here. And that really ties into, I think, one of the ground rules that you shared, Laura, about a collaborative approach. So we will be talking more about this a little bit later. And let's continue on. And like I said, we definitely have all been in situations where it may be uncomfortable, whether we initiate the situation or not. So I'd like for everybody now to take a moment to think about a specific time that you were involved in that kind of a situation. Who else was involved? And I'd like you to think about one in particular that really did feel uncomfortable. And what do you think it was about that made it so? So Laura's going to put you into breakouts, and I'd like you to take a few minutes to each share what was the situation, and in particular, what made it so uncomfortable. And we'll take about 8 to 10 minutes for that. So Laura, whenever you're ready, if you can put them in.
I'm working. I'm not sure how many of you. It should be between 2 or 3 people. So I'm going to open the rooms, and
so we'll take 10 minutes so everybody has a chance to share briefly.
If I did that right, I hope I did that right. Did everybody get an invitation to join a room?
No.
I did not.
Okay.
No.
Let me do it one more time real quick. Okay, 9 breakout rooms, and I'm assigned automatically. Here we go. Piano, can you
I'll give everybody a moment to get back. So, like I said, we have all been there.
Hey, Barbara,
Yes.
there's a lot of people still.
Oh, still.
Yeah, I'd wait a few
Okay, good.
seconds. I think when I
you can let me know then. Perfect.
Yeah, when I ended it, it added, I think, a minute to it for some reason.
Okay, yeah.
Now they're coming back right now.
No, that works. Yeah.
Yeah. You should see them all coming back in.
Right. Looks like, would you say, Laura, it's just
Yep,
about
you're good.
that?
Mhm.
Okay, great. So we've all been there. Do I have any volunteers that would be willing to share, an example of when you've had to, when you found challenge or an uncomfortable situation?
Well, this is Ruben. I can go ahead.
Great.
We actually had we had to make tough decision to let 2 folks in our leadership team go. And one of them was actually I used to work with him before at a different company. And so it was also a personal friendship. Yeah, there were a lot of conversations trying to right the ship, but it didn't work out in the end.
Yes.
And then having that conversation, letting that person go, that was no fun at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And just as you're describing, it's not only the professional context, but then when you interject the personal aspect as well. Yeah, that definitely can be hard. And yes,
Oh, no, I was going to throw out in our group, there were 2 threads. One was that if there's a personal relationship, usually if it's negative. And the second one that 2 of the other members talked about is if you're, I'm going to call them boutique consulting, but if you have clients who aren't listening or there's dysfunction and that the tightrope between offending your client because you're telling them really their problems and letting them hear it, but also not losing the business or just that border. So, and if one of them wants to jump into specifics, but that was the threads.
yeah, great. Thank you, Rich. So now I'd like to hear from you. When you hear the word conflict, what comes to mind? And please just add your responses into the chat bar. So you hear the word conflict. What comes to, yes, let's see, we got some here. challenge, arguing, emotional, misalignment, negative, struggle, competing viewpoint, anger. So yeah, so it's interesting. When I ask this question, no matter who I am working with, the answers are usually associated with things that are negative. However, as you can see here, conflict itself is neither good nor bad. Rather, it's the way that it's handled that can be challenging. And from a financial perspective, you can see that there is a high price to be paid for dealing ineffectively with conflict. And the most important metrics that were used in this case were time lost due to steps in problem solving and resolution. And the assumption that was made by Robin Short is that the average employee spends a little over 2 hours a week dealing with conflict. So you could think about how that may compare to your workforce. And in looking at these figures, I venture to say that 100% of employees have dealt with workplace conflict, even if they're dealing with it by avoiding. And in addition to some of the reasons that are listed here, we can include clashes in leadership styles, cultural-based conflicts, relying on coworkers for deliverables. So think about the situation where you may have one team member who likes to prepare their work in advance, and they're waiting on a colleague who likes to procrastinate, and they need that colleague's work in order to move forward. I've worked with a lot of teams where that kind of situation could cause friction. And conflict at work, it's inevitable. And in a recent study by Myers-Briggs, they found that leaders said that poor communication was the biggest cause. And interestingly, they found that there were different responses for those that were in-house versus those that were hybrid or remote workers. So those that were in office reported poor communications, while others identified lack of transparency as being the primary culprit. So again, think about how that may play out in your organization and whether you see any differences between in-office and hybrid. And let's take a closer look at what may cause conflict so that we'd have a greater insight into how to best respond to it. So many of you may remember this visual from a few years back. About a week before a wedding, the mother of the bride sent a photo to the couple about what she planned to wear. And that's when the disagreement began. The bride and groom couldn't agree on whether the dress was blue and black or white and gold. So they posted this photo on Facebook, and the picture went viral. And it was debated on the news, on the internet, even by scientists. And neuroscientists, they decided that the issue really had something to do with the way the human eye sees color, something to do with rods and cones in our retinas, so that some people really do see the dress as white and gold and others as blue and black. So Laura put up a poll. Let's see what you see. Please go ahead and respond.
I'm going to share the results. Looks like I've got everybody in.
Okay, very interesting. So white and gold is the majority, and that's personally what I see. But again, it's none is better than the other. It's just different. And it's, again, probably not a surprise that teams that have more diversity tend to have better outcomes. When we bring different perspectives together, different opinions, different experiences, we're going to be able to provide more value overall. And Patrick Lencioni's model about the 5 behaviors of cohesive teams, in it, he states that you need to have a foundation of trust, most of all. And then the next step is for the team to be able to manage conflict constructively. And having that solid sense of camaraderie, being able to be vulnerable with one another, that all allows you to be able to do so. And then once a team is able to deal with conflict effectively, they can commit to common goals, they can hold each other accountable, and ultimately achieve the results that they're looking to achieve.
Barbara, quick question for you. Do you have any thoughts or research on how individual ethnicity, their cultures, gender, impact some of this in conflict resolution? Like, in some countries, standing nose to nose is perfectly accepted, but for the US, we want more space.
Yes.
I can make some generalizations about Mars versus Venus, how they handle conflict. And so just some of those dynamics, how they work into this process.
Absolutely. So, and one point related to that is that we all do bring differences to the equation. And the important aspect here is to recognize those differences, to respect those differences, also to learn more about those differences, however, not to necessarily make assumptions. So it's interesting, I was just talking with consultants, and they're focusing specifically on teaching different individuals how to work best in different cultures, just to that point, because there are different styles. And the more you can learn and understand what's appropriate in the culture that you're working in, the better. And so on that note, a few years back, I was working with an R&D team at a Fortune 50 company, and we were working on building team performance. And as we were discussing preferences for dealing with conflict, one of the more seasoned engineers confided that he often held back during the conversations because he didn't want to share controversial perspectives, because he didn't like to make waves. The team members were pretty surprised to hear that. So they then made it clear that they really wanted and valued his viewpoint. It was very important, and that he may be able to see potential design flaws that others couldn't. And so as we were developing team norms, the group made sure to emphasize that everyone's opinion is valid and it needed to be heard. So no surprise that that team, they spent the time to better understand this, and they consistently met their deliverables. So here are some other very common situations where you may run into conflict at work. And let me at this point ask, what are some others that you've seen? Again, feel free to add it into the chat or take yourself off mute. The last one is a really important one. When ethics and values clash, that can be very challenging. And a number of years back, I was working for a company in a human resource role when one of the top executives stopped by, and he asked me to do something related to staffing that would have gone against my own moral code. And as hard as it was, I told him that I wouldn't take that action, and I explained why. And he begrudgingly understood, and frankly, I think I even earned more respect that day. So being clear on your values and being able to stand up to a situation where there might be confrontation, that can be very helpful. And I see there's a couple of chat comments. Great. Yes. And Rich, you wrote technique. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, often, I need something done, and there's multiple ways to get it done. And I have a process, or someone has, we're going to take route A, Laura wants to take route B, and you want to take route C, and we argue or have conflict over what's the right way to go. We all end up in the same place at about the same time, and it really doesn't matter. But for some reason, there's often conflict about that. And in my previous lifestyle, or my life, I was in the Air Force. Foo Fighters, we had procedure, which was written and you had to follow it. Then we had technique, and typically the conflict was about whose technique was better. And it just
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, we all do have a preferred style or technique. So here are some of the different factors that influence our worldview, and some of the ones that we've already brought up. Cultural expectations is on there. You know, your family background, even your race, ethnicity, etc. And I love the expression, words create worlds. And often the words that we use can be received differently than we intended. So years ago, I was working with another small privately held company, and we were developing competencies and values for the organization. And one word that came up from the executive leadership was accountability. And I followed up with focus groups with employees to get their perspective and their buy-in. And feedback I heard across the board was that accountability had a punitive sound to it. Now, accountability, it doesn't hold that meaning for me, nor did it for the other executives. But we wanted to value and respect all opinions. So the organization went with another word instead that held the same meaning, that of responsibility, or one that was close. So other factors that can also lead to miscommunication include stereotypes, biases, jumping to conclusions. And once again, I have an example. I used to coach a director at a large company who's a gay male, African-American. He's an engineer from the South. And he shared with me that he was selected to be part of a task force that was being led by an older white male who was from the Midwest. So my client confided to me that he thought that they would have nothing in common. As it turns out, the senior leader, his son is gay, and he and my client really worked very well together. And my client was even offered a promotion. So the moral behind this story is to keep an open mind. And we all know what happens when we assume, right? So like I said, we all have our own natural preferences and styles and techniques. And so it can be very helpful to understand your own preferences as well as preferences of others. So the TKI is one of the world's best-selling instruments for understanding conflict. And it was developed back in the mid-70s. And it's a self-reported questionnaire that consists of 30 different pairs. And when completing it, you have to decide which of the pair statements most resonates with you. And as you can see here, there are 5 potential styles. And while the assessment cites that there's no style that is any better than any other, there are situations where certain styles are preferred. So let me just pause here to ask if any of you have taken the TKI. Okay, so the TKI, as you can see here, uses 2 axes, that of assertiveness and cooperation or cooperativeness. And although I'm not going to be taking you through the full assessment here, I'll be providing an overview of each style. And I created a worksheet, so that's one of the handouts. It's in the chat bar. So my disclaimer is, again, it's not the full instrument, but it should give you an idea as to where you land. So let's start off with competing, which it's in the upper left-hand corner. So high assertiveness, low cooperativeness. And if you're a person with a competing style, you like to take quick action, you don't mind making unpopular decisions, you're willing to stand up for those vital items, and you're decisive. So that's the competing style, and it comes in handy when there's little time for discussion. So let's say there was an emergency, literally a fire in the office. Knowing that there's somebody that's going to act quickly, take charge, that's a plus. this can also come into play when an unpopular decision needs to be made. And over the last 2 years, I was working with a company president. She had to make those unpopular decisions when it came to policies related to COVID. And I'm sure with the pandemic, many of you have been in that situation or have many examples there. Like I said, competing is important, especially when there's critical issues that need to be decided. Maybe it's a matter of knowing how to adhere to policy or legislation. So skills associated with competing include the ability to clearly explain your intentions, to be able to state your opinion clearly, and to remain calm and level-headed when situations get heated. Also, to be able to link your assertions back to the outcomes. If you overuse this, you may have lower employee engagement. But if you don't use it enough, there may be a lot of indecision or waffling. So on your handout, there's a scale of 0 to 9. Take a moment to mark down where you think you would be with respect to competing. So while competing was high assertiveness and low cooperativeness, accommodating is low assertiveness and high cooperativeness. So people who prefer this style, they like to keep the peace, they're willing to be reasonable, and they like to create goodwill. And accommodating comes into play often when long-term relationships matter, or when the issue isn't very important to you. So you may see accommodating styles when it comes to meeting customer needs. Some very important traits related to this style are the ability to put others' needs first, the willingness to yield, and also having patience. If you overuse accommodating, you may lose out on contributions, but if you may also overlook important ideas, and you also may be holding back on your ability to persuade or influence. But if you don't use it enough, you may impinge on rapport building, and you might also have lower morale and engagement. So once again, take a look at your assessment sheet on a scale of 0 to 9. Put a mark as to where you think you are for accommodating. And the next style is avoiding. And as you can see here, avoiding is low on both dimensions. However, avoiding does have its time and place. So this style can come in handy when you want to leave unimportant issues alone, maybe when you want to reduce tensions or buy some time. So let's say you got a text from a vendor asking about the status of a contract agreement, and you're waiting to get approval from legal, and you know that that should be coming soon. So maybe you decide not to answer the text right away until you have the information that you need. Avoiding can come in handy also when you need time to prepare a response, or if you have very little knowledge about the subject. And especially when the issue isn't very important, and an avoiding style can come in handy. Having a solid sense of timing and the ability to delicately sidestep during a tense situation, that can come in handy. And it also can allow you to have more time to set up a favorable situation, but you also have to be cognizant that resentment may result. So once again, check off where you think you fall for avoiding. Compromising comes next. So this is at the midpoint of both axes, and I'm sure we are all familiar with the ability to give and take. And compromising works especially well when the two parties are at an equal level or have equal power in the organization. And it's also very effective when time is of the essence. In order to compromise, you need to be willing and able to find middle ground, and also to be able to make concessions. However, if you use compromising too much, both parties may not be gaining the full benefit of what could be reached. And it does take less time than the final style that I'll be going through, which is collaboration. So once again, check off where you think you might be for compromising. And then this leads into our final style, that of collaborating. So collaborating is at the high end of both assertiveness and cooperativeness, the proverbial win-win. It's good for integrating solutions, merging perspectives, gaining commitment, and improving relationships, all of which sounds great, right? And you may be thinking, why wouldn't we use collaboration all the time? Well, not all issues need a collaborative solution. Remember going back to my fire or emergency situation that I mentioned earlier? If you've got that going on, do you really want your leaders to be collaborating on the solution? No, you want a decision to be made and to be made quickly. And what is more precious than time? Collaborating on unimportant issues is a time waster. And I often hear that from folks, that they're invited to attend meetings when they don't really need to be there. And no one wants to waste time on trivial matters, or also it can diffuse responsibility. And if collaboration isn't used enough, it may result in a lack of commitment, or maybe a workforce that doesn't feel empowered. But collaboration also takes skill. You need to be able to listen with empathy, identify underlying issues, and communicate effectively. So once again, take a moment to mark down where you think you are on the collaborative scale. With that, I'm going to now ask Laura to put you into your second breakout. And again, we'll take about 10 minutes or so for you to identify or share what do you think is your primary style, what makes it positive or negative, and where does it also cause difficulty? So let's get about 10 minutes for that, please.
I'm going to create the breakout rooms. If for any reason you can't join because you're in the middle of something, that's okay. But let's get everybody in there. Fiona, can you stop recording?
Looks like I think most people are back. Let me just give folks a few more seconds to get back in the main room.
There you go. I think you're all set, Barbara.
Great. And do I have any volunteers that would be willing to share your style and how it's played out for you?
Tara needs to talk. She has when you get to it, so she had a great conversation.
Oh, great.
Well, we talked about with our styles, really that we're all a little bit of everything. Barb, as you were saying, really depends on the situation, and we have to accommodate really urgency and just the specifics of the time. We also talked a little bit about what we actually are versus our self-perception of what we are, which could be very different. Because of what do we know other than what we think we know.
Right.
But maybe where we think we're being collaborative, somebody else thinks we're being competing, or vice versa. And then the third thing that we just started to talk about at the end, and we ran out of time, was the model is a little bit, would love to get more insight into people who maybe project that they're cooperative, but it's underneath, they really hate having to be cooperative, or the same thing even in the assertiveness section. And how do you bucket them into one of these if they're going along, but that's not their true, their true feeling?
Yeah. So you're describing more of like a passive aggressive behavior where they may be, stating one thing, but their behavior, underlying behaviors demonstrate something else. And so my recommendation there is that it's confronted in a direct and very open way, but that the behaviors are being called out. So, and on that note, that really leads us in a great segue into the next piece here, which is really, no matter what our preferences, we can all work to improve our communication. And like I just said, definitely recommend really focusing on having an open, curious, direct, and consultative approach. And asking questions is a great way to get information. The Human Capital Institute has identified 3 different types of questions. The first being high gain, and the other 2 are probing and closed-ended. And high gain should really only account for 10 to 20% of questions. And these are those powerful ones that are thought-provoking, that really cause the person that you're working with to really, take note and think before they respond. Probing questions, that really should be the majority of the questions that you use, approximately 60 to 70%. And the goal here is to listen to what comes from that high gain question, and then to follow up in order to get deeper insight into what the individual is saying. And then finally, 10 to 20% will be closed-ended. And I know often closed-ended questions get a bad rap, but there again is a time and place for them. It can be very helpful to clarify information. So are we expected to launch the new process on February 1st? I mean, it's important to know the dates, the tangible information. Also, focusing on active listening, and not only active, but listening with empathy. That is key as well. And then finally, you may be familiar with Morabian's model of communication, but in it, he cites that words account for only 7% of how we communicate. Tone, 38%, body language is 55%. So that relates to the, again, the scenario that you were just sharing, where a person may be saying certain things, but underlying, maybe it is through body language or tone, others are sensing that maybe they're not fully bought in. And especially think about it, whether you're in person or whether you're, using a platform like Zoom, body language still comes through. So as you're communicating, I highly recommend that you be mindful with that. And I love the work of Amy Cuddy. She is a professor at Harvard. She's got some great books and TED Talks on that topic. The book she has is Presence, and her TED Talk is really about how our body language shapes who we are. So with that, I've got a listening quiz, which I believe Laura also added to the chat bar. And let me just give folks, we'll just take 2 minutes for you to go through it and check off which ones apply to you. And I would also encourage you to identify your top 3 that you'd like to continue to develop. So like I said, let's just take 2 minutes for you to go through those now. Take just another minute. And once again, who would be willing to share one of the areas for development for you? What would be something you'd be looking to improve?
I'll share. I really want to get into the habit of repeating people's names when I meet them. That is like, they tell it to me and it just kind of goes. And I am really working on trying to remember what their names. And I know that there's a lot of tools for that.
Yeah, excellent, great. I saw in the chat bar about interruptions. I'm guilty of that myself. Interruptions. Who else would like to share?
I can share listening to understand versus thinking about your response is something that I have, continually try to work on because I get excited and, animated. And sometimes that's at the expense of really taking in the full point before, engaging in further conversation.
Absolutely. These are challenging to do for sure. And to your point, you can be very, caught up in the emotion or your excitement of what is being discussed. Yeah. How about one more?
One that I thought was interesting was the eye contact with the speaker. So there's so much going on in my head most of the time, right? That
Yes.
a lot of times I will look away and look at a single object just so it's absent of distraction because it helps me listen more without realizing that could come across as not being engaged, right?
Yes, great point. And eye contact is definitely a very important factor in the body language. So people very easily could make that, again, that jump, that assumption. So great. And when you're communicating with others, certainly the way you frame an issue is also very important. And just the other day, I received a bill for my website platform, and they congratulated me on my anniversary with them, which I thought was a great way to present a bill, right? Emphasizing the ongoing relationship. And as I've stated earlier, when you're dealing with a tense relationship, it's especially important to understand the other person's perspective. And in the spirit of negotiation, a person's position is what they want. But it's also very important to understand the person's needs or interests or the why they want it. So I'm going to have you do a final exercise related to that. And if you have done this before, I'd ask that you just be an observer. But here's the scenario. We've got Pat and Chris, and they're housemates. And they get home from work one day and they see that there's only one orange left, and they both want it. So what would be some ways that you would help them to solve this dispute? Again, either you can unmute yourself or add it into the chat bar.
Cut it in half.
Okay, cut it in half. Yeah, that's
Determine who wants what part. I mean,
Ah,
we made the assumption that they both want the inside, but maybe somebody wants the rind and the other person wants the meat. You don't know.
exactly. So, and was that Deborah that responded? That's exactly right.
Yes.
You want to understand why they want the orange.
Mhm.
Because maybe Pat wants the orange because he's thirsty and would like a glass of freshly squeezed juice. And Chris may be looking to bake a cake. So this way, both folks can get their needs met. And again, you can get your needs met and resolve the issue. Here's another really powerful strategy when communicating in times of conflict, and it's called the stop method. And going back to perhaps when you're young and your parents would say, count to 10 if you're angry. But with the stop method, if you're in a heated discussion, you want to stop what you're doing, take a few deep breaths, observe your emotions, observe your assumptions, like physically where you're at, and then you can proceed with intentionality. So it's really a way of, again, related to emotional intelligence, of self-management, and it can be very powerful. Let me also share another powerful breathing technique that can be used in times of difficult conversations, and it's called box breathing. And so simply stated, how you use box breathing is you inhale for a count of 4. So you take a deep breath, 2, 3, 4. You hold it, 2, 3, 4, and then you let it go, 2, 3, 4. And if you can do box breathing a few times, especially if you know you're going into perhaps a tense negotiation, or if it's even happening real time, the breath really does allow you to calm yourself, and it will make for a much more positive outcome. So as we look to wrap up our time together, I want to encourage you all to think about an upcoming situation. Like I said, during this holiday season, it may be outside of work, maybe it's something internally in the workplace that will involve conflict. In advance, think about who else may be involved, and to estimate what do you think is their style preference. And then you can, in advance, think about what are some proactive ways that you can address the situation to achieve the desired outcome. As a few of you have mentioned, we all have the capability of using all of those different styles. So the key here is, if at all possible, to understand where's the other person coming from, so how you can best make for again, a proactive, positive outcome. I love this. Before you speak, to think, if we could only have more of this in the world today, think about what you're saying. Is it true? Is it going to be helpful for the other person? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? And is it kind? And then another one I've heard added onto this, and does it need to be said by you? So with that, I wanted to leave some time for Q&A. The 4 agreements, yes. Josh's comment, yeah, I think the media has the same poster saying the opposite, right? So questions, comments, reactions.
I have a question, Barb. So with remote working, what are the challenges with, dealing with conflict over distance? I grew up just pick up the phone and talk on the phone. Is the phone still better, or is seeing facial expressions and jumping on a Zoom call the way to go? I would assume it's Zoom, but any thoughts on that?
Yes, so absolutely great question. Ideally, face-to-face is best, but given that that is not always possible, Zoom is the next best thing so that you can see facial expressions, body language. And as I mentioned, this is where it's very important to be mindful of your body language so that there aren't misinterpretations.
Got it.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Good. Other
and avoid email and other written things, because that actually usually causes more conflict.
Right. Yeah. I have a great example there too, where and this was outside of work, but I was planning an event with somebody who was a relative of a family member. So I didn't know this person well at all. And her text to me actually, and emails were very curt, very brief. And I interpreted that like, what? Does she not like me? Is she angry? Making all these assumptions. When I met her, I realized it is just, again, her personality style. And probably her style here is competing, results oriented. She is an emergency room physician. So one that does not have a lot of time. So it had nothing to do with again, the context or the personality, but it's just, again, a different communication style, which is why it's the more you can do to get that additional context, the better.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And Rich, you brought up a good point, because it's easy to kind of see conflict, and emotions go up right during a live conversation, but also kind of knowing when to get something out of email or a conversation out of email into a live conversation is also another skill we should have, because sometimes after the second or third email, you're like, okay, I got to get it out of email now. It's time to talk about it.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, a friend of mine just says, pick up the damn phone.
Right. Yeah. And in the old days, it would be, get up out of, off your seat and walk over to the person. But again, today, that's not always possible.
So Barbara, I have a question or comment.
Yeah.
I think the vast majority of people on this session are using these tools. Maybe they don't call them the same thing, but that is their style, because that's needed to get to where they are. Maybe talk a little bit, how do we push this down within organizations? How do we train and develop that next level of leadership managers to pick up some of these tasks and maybe some habits that allow that to happen within our organization?
Yeah, great question. I am a huge advocate of understanding your own style and the style of others. So if at all possible, to introduce assessments such as DISC or the MBTI or something like this, where individuals can learn about their own communication style and the style of others. And I believe Cloverleaf is another platform that allows for understanding and seeing another person's style. And again, it's so great now with AI that it's even to the point where if I know my style and I know I'm going to be in a tense meeting with Chuck, I can in advance see what is his style and what are some tips for best communicating. So there is so much out there on that. And really, it's all about introducing and committing the organization to practicing, because it is skill development. So I think the more that the executive leadership team is bought into that and demonstrates that, all the better. Great question.
And Rich, I think what I found too is usually anytime I hire a new leader, they go through with the HR, right, kind of a mini assimilation exercise. So including that assessment in there because it's all about understanding, obviously, your people and how they behave, so you can really tailor your approach. So including in some kind of communication assessment in that assimilation exercise will really condense that knowledge and, help set them on the right path.
Exactly. And it's really all about encouraging that the flexibility and the agility of styles, which again, I'm sure all of you probably have that, or you wouldn't be at the level that you're at. But in terms of the question of, taking that to all levels of the organization, again, providing exposure and to practice the skill sets. Did I see, was there a question about the TED Talk woman? That's Amy Cuddy. Last name is Cuddy. She's great. There's also another book related to what we were talking about called Digital Body Language. Unfortunately, the author's name escapes me now, but that is also really interesting about just what we're talking about with the world changing today, using more, email, texting, etc., how we can use that effectively in our communication.
Hey, Barbara, this is Dawn Wagner. Amy Cuddy also does an amazing TED Talk out there on power poses.
Yes.
So she really talks about, how, doing interviews, which was her subject group, right? Just how intense that is and how intimidating that is. And just one of the most stressful situations that people, probably go through, and how empowering that is. I actually used it on diversity. Tour of mine over in India, where primarily, right, the diversity dynamic is gender. And so it was one of the tools in which to empower yourself, right? It was all about, well, what can I do? I can't change in this particular topic, right? All the opinions of others, but it could be, or the conflict of others, or the opinions of others in that sense. But it's, grounding yourself and coming into that situation of what you have control over. So I recommend that to anybody who hasn't seen it. It's awesome. She's great.
I love it. And I also love that particular TED Talk and with the power poses. And it related to this too. I'm sure there's some connections between our body language. Like, let's say if I'm coming into a meeting with my arms crossed and my legs crossed, it may be that I'm just in my office and it's cold, but what does the other person tend to think? So again, being very mindful of how we, portray ourselves to others can also be very insightful in this kind of a context. So Dawn, glad you love it. I'm a huge fan of that as well. Oh, also some other resources related to the topic. Of course, Crucial Conversations is another, I'd say, classic, as well as Getting to Yes. Those are two that are very, very helpful.
It was discussed earlier about pushing things down in the organization. And I think it was Rich, you mentioned, it's just well said that, you may have this skill set, but if someone is that you're talking to on the other, having this conversation with, do not have that, maybe they're taking things personally, maybe they're making assumptions. There's really only so far you can go. And one of the things that I find that really help to practice this skill set is when the opportunity is provided for others to facilitate. They see what good facilitation is, and you put them in a role. So for development, members of my team, right, you provide them opportunities to specifically learn how to facilitate, because in facilitation, your job is different. And so it allows them to kind of practice the skill set and divorce from the outcome and be able to, reward and accept and celebrate that they've successfully facilitated something. That's a way to get that muscle going, and to enable people to to practice the agility, right? Where their stakes aren't in their assertiveness, their voice, getting a decision made, but instead getting the group to get there. So we've had that at times in different development plans to help with this, because at the end of the day, right, we all have values around collaboration, and we say, go collaborate. And ultimately people are like, I don't really know how to do that.
Adding to that, Liz, another great technique is peer coaching or having sessions. Let's say, lower levels of the organization. Let's say you have a group of either individual contributors or perhaps new managers, and having them spend some time together, providing them with specific scenarios that you can develop in advance that are related to, real situations in your organization, and to have them practice with each other. Yes, trying different, collaborative styles, or perhaps, a compromising style, whatever would make sense. And you could also have another person observe, and then that also helps them to build their feedback skills. So it's a safe environment for them to get that skills practice, and like just as Liz said, to really develop those muscles.
I'll throw another one out of in the collaboration mode. One that I try to work on that I always haven't done well is the and. They talk about ad lib of somebody brings something up, instead of being able to go and then bring your point up, because it's additive, you're not trying to take away from this session.
Yeah.
But it's not always easy to do.
Yeah. Another one too, that again, we all probably know, but it really is powerful, is the use of I statements, so that you're taking ownership for what you're saying. And it really does tend to diminish, the idea of finger pointing or blaming somebody else. It's how I am seeing the situation. And Laura, were you about to say something?
No.
Yeah. So other comments, other resources, this is again a great opportunity to share some favorites. Another good one is Speed of Trust. That was written by Covey's son. And that also, clearly there's such a correlation between building trust and being able to deal with, challenging conversations. So that's another good one.
Yeah, so I wanted to jump in. We're about 8 minutes out, and so I thought maybe this is a good opportunity before people begin to drop off to get to the next meeting. But I just want to say thank you, Barb. This has been great. We can give everyone give Barb a nice round of applause. Thank you so much for doing this for us on a Friday, and I want to thank all of the members and all of our guests for attending today. It's great to see so many faces. I know how busy we all are, and to have everyone on this call today has been wonderful. Just a few points of, business to take care of. Our next session is going to be an executive session on December 13th, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. And longtime member Arel Anderson from our ambassador team is going to be leading that executive session. So if you have a chance, jump in there. And also I want to point out, Barb mentioned Cloverleaf. So Cloverleaf is a partner of the COO Forum, and some of you may have heard Dr. Scott Dust present this past year. If you're interested in Cloverleaf, we'll drop that in our meeting recap, but through our partnership, there's all sorts of, insights that you can get, and through our relationship, some real opportunity to put Cloverleaf to use in your organization, as well as Double Gemini is another partner of ours. You may remember Prasant Nair and Anya Singleton, who came in this year, to talk about communication, specifically around emails. And so I think it might have been Rich who mentioned the tone of our emails, or when to take the discussion out of an email. And they do a wonderful job of building some frameworks around email etiquette and communications that are pretty powerful. So just wanted to throw that out there, and thank you everyone, and happy to stay on until noon Eastern time.
Everybody have a great weekend. Thanks for
Thank you.
joining. Thank you, Barb.
Thank you.
Well,
Thanks all. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend.